Support for the CivicSciTV network comes from viewers, readers, and listeners like you, and organizations such as the Berlin Science Week and the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Visit CivicSciTV.org to learn more about our network of programs.
Theresa Donofrio is a communications scholar with expertise in rhetoric and political culture. Her work explores how public tragedies are discussed and remembered, and she analyzes the narratives that shape our understanding of these events. She currently serves the Association of Science and Technology Centers as a Civic Science Fellow with Seeding Action.
As Seeding Action's Civic Science Fellow, I work in two modes. I work to support the ongoing efforts of Seeding Action, which is an initiative that ASTC leads designed to cultivate a culture of hope and action connected to matters of planetary health. And I'm tasked with developing new projects and initiatives that augment the abilities of science centers and museums to work alongside their communities as they engage with planetary health and contribute to advancing and improving planetary health.
Her journey to her current work and research started with the humanities, where she had a long-standing interest in language and symbols. Early in her educational journey, Theresa developed an interest in how language and symbol systems shape or challenge belief systems and ultimately construct critical facets of the worlds we inhabit.
That area of inquiry for me became so central that it became kind of the driving force in my educational path, leading me to pursue a degree in communication with an emphasis in rhetoric, and then eventually to teach. So my path from my educational journey led me to a small liberal arts college where I served as a faculty member, teaching classes in communication studies, and also pursuing a line of research. And my line of research has always been deeply interested in how we make meaning of the past. And a lot of that meaning for me has meant studying museums and memorials. And so that body of work and that phase of my professional career really kind of had two threads that I can see informing where I went next. The first is that notions of rhetoric are really deeply enmeshed with notions of the civic. So if we're thinking about civic science, there are a lot of different ways that people make the argument about the relationship between the civis and between rhetoric. But on an anecdotal level, I remember having a conversation really early with a faculty member and a mentor of mine. And we were talking about to what extent you could really have a highly individualistic interpretation of something, or how you could make meaning of it, maybe in isolation or by yourself. And I remember this person saying to me, yes, we could talk about this, but if you want to be understood, or if you want to be in community or in conversation with other people, you're using symbols and language systems that are fundamentally social and relational, and that we're building understanding by using meaning systems that we come to agree upon certain critical elements of them. And so that notion that we are always thinking about audiences and always thinking about publics and always thinking about communities has really been part of the whole path to be studying and invested in the art and inquiry around rhetoric.
Theresa's work has also heavily focused on how museums are sites where people are actively engaged in public acts of meaning-making.
And so museums are doing that work to highlight stories, which stories get included. They narrate and make meaning of events. They communicate messages about identity and about belonging and about who we should be or how we should be when we leave a museum space. And so pursuing that line of kind of rhetoric and museums was always also a pretty collective project for me. So I've been really lucky throughout my journey to cross paths with and then to find collaborators who are also pursuing these questions. So from doing this research, I ended up being really lucky to have a fellowship that introduced me literally by crossing paths with people, like being in rooms with people who are picking up similar questions while working in and around museums, who then put me in conversation with other people who were pursuing questions in the museum field, and then introducing me to a class I could take at Northwestern University in museum studies that then kind of directed my attention to the work that ASTC is doing. And that's how I found out about seeding action. And that's how the kind of path led to the position that I'm in right now.
Rather than seeing her career as concrete moments, Theresa thinks about her career in terms of lines of inquiry. There have always been critical questions that have shaped her interests and the paths that she has gone down in her career.
Two of the threads that have felt really important and really critical to me have been thinking about what are the narrative frameworks that help us to instill a sense of agency? So a lot of my work has been about rhetorics that surround public tragedies, because these are so often sites where questions immediately kind of rush in about what does this mean? What does it mean to make sense of this event? What are we to do after this event that we're thinking about? And in those moments, there's always discourse that is trying to make sense of what's just occurred. And we do that sense making in a lot of different ways. And some of that is in museums, and some of that is explicitly kind of communicating how the past or how things that have preceded us connect to the present and then connect to the future. And so I've been interested in those kind of temporal or memory or timelines as they've unfolded in different spaces. And to kind of map that then to think about how do we think about climate and how do we think about the moment that we're inhabiting right now related to planetary health. One set of those questions has been, well, what are the frameworks that really help to inspire a sense of agency and to inspire a sense of capability and efficacy to take action? And so I'm really kind of interested in those questions about how discourses and communication frameworks and narrative frameworks can connect to our own sense of what can be done and who we are in relationship to the kind of the moment that we live in and the opportunities we have to take action. And alongside that, the other piece of it has often been museums to me are these really powerful spaces where we're often shaping these arguments. And as a visitor, I'm always really interested in that very last room of an exhibition, right? Like maybe before you go to the next exhibition or maybe before you exit the museum, because so often that's a space that's filled with opportunities to make an argument or to say, how does what you've just experienced, how does the subject that we're talking about, how does it end, right? How does it go forward to the next thing? And in those moments, it's laden with possibilities to communicate arguments about what we take with us and who we should be or how we should be as we move forward into the world. So those two threads have been incredibly, I guess I should say ones that have had tons of energy around them for me and continue to captivate me. And they're pieces of thinking about museums and science centers and their roles and how we can talk about planetary health in the moment that we live in right now.
Collaborating with others, learning from them, and engaging in meaningful conversations have been invaluable to Theresa's career and a key area of personal growth.
I will say that I'm somebody who has a tendency to want to hold onto my work for not as long as possible, but I want to look at it again and reread it and make sure everything seems like it's in as solid of a place it can possibly be. And what that often turns into for myself is a tendency to hold back, be a little bit more reluctant to put ideas, especially drafty ideas, into community space. So the biggest lesson that I'm learning and continue to learn, especially because right now I am really fortunate and really lucky to be in community with people who have been so generous with their time and with their insight and have just been really generous is the best word for it, generous thought partners. And so the lesson that I'm taking away from the work I'm doing right now, because it's so collaborative, is share more, draft out loud, and do so even when it's a little uncomfortable for me. So like I often have to kind of swallow some of my own trepidation about, oh, this is only what I could do more, and like these are the things I could maybe think a lot more about. And the lesson that I'm taking away from is that projects are strengthened by putting them into spaces where other people can give you feedback and can shape them. That means kind of like letting go of pieces and knowing that like they will be better the quicker that you can give them to people who want to think alongside you to answer these questions.
As a Civic Science Fellow, Theresa is focused on understanding the role museums and science centers play in promoting a healthier planet while also inspiring and inviting widespread participation in planetary health action.
What's emerging is a really deep conviction in and interest in understanding more about the role of imagination in generating planetary health solutions, and then thinking about how to bolster science centers and museums' capacities to foster imaginative and inventive forms of thinking on matters of planetary health and in conjunction with matters of planetary health. And what's really energizing about this work is that it is, to me, kind of fundamentally interdisciplinary, and that there is so much energy that's already circulating in this space. So science centers and museums already do a lot of work to think about like, what does the future look like? And what does it mean to kind of think about different visions of the future and figure out pathways forward? And there are so many like choruses of voices in the arts and the humanities that are also invested in similar kinds of projects to think about what does the world look like? What could it look like? And what are the ways that we might like take action to bring those visions into being and to make them tangible and to make them concrete? And so that to me means that there is a lot that is already kind of circulating around these notions of imagination and planetary health. And because I'm a researcher by training, I often liken this phase of the project to a literature review on a paper. And so I think about where I'm at right now as a moment where part of what I'm really doing is kind of looking for and really deeply trying to listen for what's already happening in this space. What are people doing right now around this shared set of questions? Where are the connections? Where are there conversations that might not be exactly happening with each other, but there's opportunities to think about points of synthesis? Where are maybe the gaps? Like what hasn't been developed yet? Or where are there things that maybe don't have as robust of conversations already kind of going on around them? And really using this time to kind of synthesize like a challenge that we could talk about this is that this is a broad field and so much to say like imagination and planetary health is to kind of call into being way more literature and way more conversations and way more thought partners than a person could possibly kind of have conversation with, even if I spent like months and months and months just doing this phase of it. So this is kind of a challenge related to the way I kind of think about big areas of inquiry. And then to kind of tie it all the way back around, so what does this look like right now? Even as I'm trying to synthesize all of these conversations, part of what I'm really mindful of is that part of my role is also to think about not just what can I learn by putting all these puzzle pieces together, but also what can I create and what can I kind of offer is a way to be of service in my role to the communities that I'm in conversation with. And for me, in the capacity that I am working in my Civic Science Fellowship, that means thinking about Seeding Action and the Seeding Action Network members and the communities surrounding the Seeding Action. And so I'm really kind of thinking deeply about what would it mean right now to build spaces where we can share knowledge and insight and kind of work from the notion that so many people in science centers and in museums are doing this work around imagination. So how can we build some collective spaces for resource and knowledge sharing? And what can be created that could be a suite of additional materials? Sometimes those could take a wide variety of forms that would really support and add more to what different organizations and institutions or communities are doing in this space.
In doing this project, Theresa has found that the wealth of prior conversation, history, and knowledge that already exist around these topics, like imagination, to be energizing forces. At the same time, she has found that they also offer some challenges.
There's so much that could inform this project. Like, the work on imagination can draw from so many different fields and can be in conversation with so many different writers and so many different museums and so many different public thinkers that are really taking up these very same prompts. Mm-hmm. And the challenging piece for that then for me is that that to me means that I could spend a lot of time in those conversations and still not be able to wrap my arms around everything that's preceded. And so I really try to balance a couple different pieces. One is that even thinking about our conversation today, I do so from often a position of being everything that comes before is really important. I think that sometimes there can be in the process of creation, this notion that as an individual pulling threads together, I try to both balance the energy of I want to create something that is deeply informed and that acknowledges and is highly in respect of all of the ideas that have preceded the moment that a project kind of comes into fruition. And so I've been thinking a lot about okay, well, what are the major how to name and acknowledge all of the bodies of literature that circulate around something. And the benefit of this project is that there's a lot. I could map the kind of evolution of this project in so many different ways, and it would have so many antecedents. And so right now, where I'm at in the work, I'm still working on what that map looks like, right? I've got so many different people I feel I could name, oh, and I've been reading this work and thinking about this author, and these museums are doing amazing work in this area around imagination. And I'm still doing that piece of okay, which pieces, how to name and acknowledge the really depth of information that swirls around these areas, and still practice the discernment of a challenge for me has always been when to stop, kind of move from reading mode to making mode. I don't mean to position those as two different things, but sometimes there's a shift in the process. And that to me is one of the things I'm thinking about right now.
In terms of advice for future civic scientists or current researchers,
let the question be the guide. Let the question guide where your work goes. And I say that because if you had asked me 8 months ago to define the field of civic science and does my work constitute a form of civic science, to be really honest with you, I would have struggled. I would have struggled to describe civic science, and I would have kind of hesitated and been not sure if the projects that I've taken up would constitute a form of civic science. But if you had asked me 8 months ago, what are the questions that animate your work? And what are the questions that inspire your curiosity? I would have been able to give you almost a very similar set of questions to the ones we've discussed today. And it would have been really clear on these are the questions that shape my work. And so for me, what's been really meaningful is that the questions have often led me to the collaborations and to the people that are working with areas of expertise that I might not have found if I wasn't kind of working with other people to take up a similar question. And so my biggest kind of takeaway from even thinking about that is that the question has always been a really good guide for me. And it's because in line with all the things I think already about education and about research, is that question answering is a social pursuit. And so it's going to, or it has for me at least, always put me in conversation with people who become my collaborators and become my teachers and become my mentors and become the people that I'm willing to bounce ideas with. And so by pursuing the question, my path has often led me to people who pointed out the next question or pointed out a place where we could collaborate, or pointed out a place and a pathway that would lead me to something that I could not have anticipated 8 months in advance or a year in advance. And so that's been something that has often led me in directions I couldn't have foreseen. And that has been something that's been really useful in my life, is to let the question guide.